At 65, I screamed. It was big and went in fast. I bet that got your attention, didn't it? Well, stick around, because there's a whole lot more to this story than you might be thinking right now. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Beverly Mitchell, but everyone just calls me Bev. I've been a widow for 7 years now after losing my David to a heart attack that nobody saw coming. We had 40 years together, raised 2 wonderful kids, Sarah and Michael, and now I've got 4 grandkids who are the light of my life, even if they don't visit their old grandma nearly as much as they should. I live in the same house we bought back in the 70s, in what used to be a quiet part of Portland, Oregon. These days, the neighborhood's changing faster than I can keep up with. There's a fancy coffee shop on every corner selling 5-dive lattes and young folks with tattoos and those man-bun haircuts, riding bicycles everywhere. Sometimes I hardly recognize the streets I've lived on for nearly 5 decades. My life's pretty quiet now. Too quiet if I'm being honest with you. After teaching high school literature for 30 years, retirement hit me hard. Then losing David, well, that changed everything. These days, my routine is simple as apple pie. Morning coffee with the newspaper. Yes, I still get the actual paper delivered. A little gardening when my arthritis isn't acting up. Maybe lunch with my friend Marge from church. And evenings watching those home renovation shows everyone's crazy about. Same old day in and day out. The funny thing is, I still put on my lipstick every morning. Revlon's Toast of New York. Been wearing the same shade since the 9s. Still dab on a little White Diamonds perfume. The one David always said made him weak in the knees. Still wear my good earrings, the pearl studs Michael gave me for my 60th birthday. Old habits die hard, I guess. Even though most days the only person who sees me is the mail carrier, or maybe the kid who delivers my groceries from Safeway. My daughter Sarah's been on my case for months about my bedroom furniture. Mom, she says, that dresser and wardrobe have got to be older than I am. And she's right. David and I bought that bedroom set back when Nixon was president, if you can believe it. But I've always been the type to make things last. Why throw something out when it's still perfectly good? That's how we were raised back then. Not like today where folks toss out a perfectly fine couch just because some TV show tells them it's out of style. But Sarah can be as stubborn as her mama. Last month, she finally wore me down. Just look at some options, she said. The drawer on your dresser doesn't even close right anymore. So, I gave in and went with her to Woodward's Home Furnishing over on Burnside. Before I knew it, I picked out a new wardrobe, one of those modern ones with sliding doors and built-in mirrors. They can deliver it next Wednesday, the salesman told us. And our guy will assemble it for you right there in the bedroom. I didn't think much of it until Tuesday night. I was getting ready for bed, doing my usual routine. Face cream, brushing my hair, flossing my teeth. My dentist would be so proud. And then, without really thinking about it, I reached for my perfume. Just a tiny spritz behind each ear. The familiar scent of White Diamonds filled the bathroom. And I caught myself wondering why on earth I was putting on perfume before bed. Especially when the only person coming over tomorrow was some furniture delivery man. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, you know. The kind of looking we older gals tend to avoid these days. The soft wrinkles around my eyes, the way my neck's starting to get that crepe paper look, the gray hair I finally stopped coloring last year. But my eyes, they still had something there. A little spark, a little life. David always said my eyes gave away everything I was thinking. Poker was never going to be your game, Bev, he'd tease. That night I hardly slept a wink. Kept tossing and turning, telling myself I was just excited about the new furniture. But deep down, I knew there was something else. Something I hadn't felt in so long. I'd nearly forgotten what it was like. Anticipation. That little flutter in your stomach when you're waiting for something or someone. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m., Wednesday morning. I'd already been up since 6, had the house spotless, made a fresh pot of coffee, and changed my outfit twice. Finally settling on my good jeans. The ones without any elastic in the waist, and a soft blue sweater Sarah once told me, brought out my eyes. I peeked through the little peephole on my front door, and that's when I saw him. He wasn't what I expected, not at all. The delivery guys who usually came were either college boys working part time, or older men with tired eyes and bad backs from years of heavy lifting. But this man, well, he was something else entirely. Tall with broad shoulders filling out his Woodward's uniform shirt, dark hair cut short, but not too short. And when I opened that door, a smile that made me glad I was holding on to the doorknob for support. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice deep and warm as fresh-baked bread. "I'm Jake Reynolds from Woodward's. I'm here about your wardrobe." And just like that, my quiet, predictable life was about to change in ways I never could have imagined. I stepped back, holding the door open wide. "Yes, come on in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and normal. "Just an ordinary Wednesday with an ordinary furniture delivery. That's all this was, nothing to get all worked up about. You can call me Bev," I added, surprising myself. Usually, I'm pretty formal with service people. Mrs. Mitchell this, Mrs. Mitchell that. But something about those kind eyes made Mrs. Mitchell feel stiff and wrong. Jake smiled again, and I noticed a dimple in his right cheek. "Nice to meet you, Bev. Beautiful home you've got here." He wiped his work boots carefully on my welcome mat before stepping inside. That small gesture of respect didn't go unnoticed. "Thank you. It's been home for nearly 50 years now," I told him, leading the way through my living room. "My husband and I bought it back when this neighborhood was nothing fancy. You should have seen what we paid for it then. These days, I couldn't afford to buy a garden shed around here." Jake looked around at my living room as we passed through, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the worn but well-polished coffee table, the quilt my mother made for us as a wedding present, draped over my favorite armchair. Every single thing in this house tells a story. Every picture frame, every knick-knack, every piece of furniture has a memory attached to it. "You've kept it up real nice," he said, and it didn't sound like empty small talk. "They don't build them like this anymore. Look at that crown molding. That's all original, isn't it?" I nodded, pleased that he'd noticed. "David, that's my late husband. He was always fixing things up around here. He could build or repair just about anything." I paused at the bottom of the stairs. "The wardrobe's going in my bedroom upstairs. Hope that's not a problem." "No problem at all," Jake assured me, picking up his toolbox. "The delivery guys brought the boxes up already, right?" "Yes, they came yesterday. Left everything right in the bedroom." I started up the stairs, suddenly aware of every creaking step, of how slowly I was moving compared to when David and I first moved in, and would race each other to the top. "I'm afraid you'll have to take apart the old wardrobe first. It's still got all my things in it." Jake followed me up, keeping a respectful distance. "That's part of the service, ma'am. I mean, Bev, don't you worry about a thing." I hesitated at my bedroom door. For some reason, I felt nervous about letting this stranger into my most private space. This was where David and I had slept for nearly half a century. Where we'd whispered secrets in the dark. Where we'd made love. Where I'd held him that terrible night when he clutched his chest and told me to call 911. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Here we are. My bedroom was exactly as it had been for decades. The walls were still the soft yellow we'd painted them in 1982. The bedspread was the same floral pattern I'd bought at J.C. Penney for our 25th anniversary. And there against the far wall stood the massive oak wardrobe that had held our clothes since the Nixon administration. "That's the old one," I said, pointing unnecessarily. "And those boxes over there contain the new one." Jake nodded, setting down his toolbox and walking over to examine the wardrobe. "This is solid craftsmanship," he said, running his hand along the carved top. "They don't make furniture like this anymore. You sure you want to replace it?" For a second, I almost changed my mind, but then I remembered how the right door never quite closed properly anymore. How the drawers stuck in humid weather. How Sarah was right. It was time for something new. "Yes, I'm sure," I said firmly. "Besides, my daughter would have a conniption if I backed out now. She's been after me to update this room for years." Jake chuckled. "I understand. My mom's the same way. Holds on to everything until it's practically falling apart. Drives me crazy sometimes, but I respect it. Different generation, I guess." "Your mother sounds like a sensible woman," I said, smiling despite myself. "She is that," he agreed, opening the wardrobe doors to peek inside. "Now, I'll need to empty this out before I can take it apart. Is there somewhere you'd like me to put your things?" I felt my cheeks grow warm. The idea of this young man handling my clothes, seeing my dresses and blouses and undergarments. I can do that part, I said quickly. If you don't mind waiting a few minutes. Not at all. Jake stepped back, glancing around the room. I can get started unpacking the new ward parts while you do that. I'll just be over here if you need any help. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. As I began removing my clothes from the wardrobe, I couldn't help but notice how carefully Jake was opening the boxes, checking each piece, laying everything out methodically on the floor. He worked with confidence, his movements precise and purposeful. In the old wardrobe, I found things I'd forgotten were even there. A silk scarf David brought me from his business trip to Chicago in '97. The dress I wore to Sarah's college graduation. A shoebox full of birthday cards. And anniversary notes from David. I hadn't gone through these things since he passed. Each item I pulled out carried whispers of the past, little fragments of the life we'd shared. Find any buried treasure in there? Jake asked lightly, noticing my lingering over the shoebox. Just memories, I replied, my voice a little thicker than I'd intended. It's amazing what we keep, isn't it? Things that don't a darn thing to anyone else. But to you, they're priceless. Jake stopped what he was doing and looked at me with those kind eyes. My dad passed 5 years ago, he said quietly. Mom still got his favorite coffee mug sitting on the kitchen counter. Won't let anyone use it or work it. I get it. The simple words, I get it, nearly undid me, because he did seem to understand. This young man with gentle hands and respectful eyes. He wasn't just humoring an old lady. He really did get it. After I'd emptied the wardrobe, Jake began taking it apart with impressive efficiency. When he opened the bedroom window to let in some fresh air, the October sunlight streamed in, catching dust motes dancing in the air and illuminating the room in a way I hadn't seen in years. Maybe I'd gotten to the habit of keeping the curtains drawn. I realized maybe I'd been keeping more than just the sunlight out. Supposed to be a beautiful day today, Jake commented, loosening the bolts that held the wardrobe together. 70 degrees in October. Can't beat that in Portland. Usually we're under a rain cloud by now. We should enjoy it while it lasts, I agreed, folding the last of my sweaters and placing them on the bed. Before you know it, we'll be slogging through puddles until June. Jake laughed and the sound filled my bedroom like music. How long had it been since laughter echoed off these walls? Too long. Far too long. Would you like some coffee? I asked suddenly. I made a fresh pot before you arrived. He looked up from his work, that dimple appearing again. That would be great, Bev. Black is fine. Black it is, I said, heading for the door. I'll be right back. As I walked down to the kitchen, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright. I looked alive, more alive than I'd looked in 7 years. And for the first time since David died, I didn't immediately feel guilty about it. I carried the coffee upstairs carefully. 2 mugs on a small tray with sugar packets, and a little pitch of cream. Just in case Jake changed his mind about taking it black. My hands weren't as steady as they once were, and the last thing I needed was to slosh coffee all over my carpet in front of this polite young man. When I reached the bedroom, Jake had already made impressive progress. The old wardrobe was half dismantled, its sides leaning against the wall and the drawers stacked neatly in the corner. He'd laid out all the pieces of the new one in order, like a giant puzzle waiting to be assembled. Here you go, I said, setting the tray down on my dresser. Hope it's strong enough for you. David always said my coffee could put hair on your chest. The words slipped out before I could catch them, and I felt my cheeks grow warm. Lord, what was I saying? But Jake just grinned, taking the mug I offered him. Perfect. I like it strong. He took a sip and nodded approvingly. That's real coffee right there. Not like that watered-down stuff they serve at those fancy places with the green logos. You mean you don't spend $8 for a cup with Italian words in the name? I teased, surprising myself with the easy banter. It had been so long since I'd joked around with anyone besides my kids or my friend Marge. Not on a furniture assembler's salary, ma'am. He replied with a wink that sent a strange little flutter through my chest. Besides, my mom would tan my hide if I paid good money for something I could make at home for pennies. Your mother and I would get along just fine, I said, leaning against the dresser as I sipped my own coffee. Is she nearby? Jake nodded, setting his mug down carefully on a coaster. We'll live together, actually, over in Selwood. Dad passed about 5 years ago. Heart attack just like your husband. Mom couldn't keep up the mortgage payments on her own, and I was renting a crummy apartment. So he shrugged. Makes sense for both of us. That's real sweet of you, I said sincerely, finding myself even more impressed with this young man. Most guys his age wouldn't be caught dead living with their mother, let alone speaking about it so matter-of-factly. She'd tell you, I'm getting the better end of the deal. Home, cooked meals and free laundry service, he joked. But I could see the genuine affection's eyes when he spoke about her. As Jake went back to work, I found myself fascinated by his movements. There was something almost hypnotic about watching him build the new wardrobe piece by piece. His hands were strong but precise, never rushing, each movement deliberate. He handled the wood with respect, like he understood its value. So, you've been doing this a while? I asked, trying to make conversation and distract myself from how aware I'd suddenly become of his forearms, as he rolled up his sleeves to work. They were tanned and muscular with a light dusting of dark hair. About 8 years now, he replied, carefully aligning 2 panels. Started right out of high school. College wasn't really my thing. I like working with my hands, creating something real. I nodded, understanding completely. That's how David was. He could have been an engineer with his smarts, but he loved being a carpenter. Said there was something honest about it. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man, Jake said, looking up at me briefly. He had his moments, I replied with a soft smile, memories washing over me. Stubborn as a mule sometimes, but wise when it counted. For a while, we fell into a comfortable silence. The only sounds in the room being the occasional scrape of wood, or the click of parts fitting together. I should have been doing something, laundry, dishes, anything. But instead, I just sat on the edge of my bed watching Jake work. Would you mind helping me with this next part? He asked eventually. Just need you to hold this panel steady while I attach it. Of course, I said, moving over to where he indicated. I held the smooth wooden panel upright while he positioned the connecting piece. Perfect. Just like that, he said, and suddenly he was right beside me, his arm reaching around to guide my hand. If you could just move your grip a little higher. Right there. His hand briefly covered mine as he showed me where to hold, and I nearly gasped at the contact. His skin was warm, slightly calloused from his work, and the unexpected sent a jolt of something racing up my arm. It had been so long, 7 years, 1 month, and 18 days to be exact, since a man had touched me, even in such an innocent way. When Jake moved his hand away to reach for the screwdriver, I found I was holding my breath. I released it slowly, hoping he hadn't noticed my reaction. What was wrong with me? I was acting like some silly teenage girl, not a 65-year-old grandmother of 4. This is going to be a beautiful piece when it's finished, Jake said, his voice pulling me back to reality. The mirrors on these sliding doors will really open up the room, make it feel bigger. It's what my daughter said. I managed to reply, proud that my voice sounded normal. She's got an eye for these things. Interior design websites are her weakness. She's always sending me links to things I should buy. Jake laughed. The sound rich and warm in the quiet of my bedroom. My mom's the opposite. Tries to talk me out of buying anything new. What's wrong with the old one? That's her favorite question. Well, there's something to be said for that mindset, I admitted, still holding the panel steady as he worked. We didn't grow up in a throwaway culture like today. We fixed things, made them last. There's value in both, I think, Jake said thoughtfully, tightening a screw, knowing when to preserve something worth keeping, and when it's time for something new. His words hung in the air between us, seeming to carry more weight than a simple comment about furniture. Or maybe that was just my imagination working overtime. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I hardly noticed. I was too distracted by the way Jake's dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, by the clean scent of his aftershave that I caught whenever he moved closer, by the careful way he measured twice before drilling each hole. When the basic frame of the wardrobe was finally assembled and standing, Jake stepped back to examine his work, a satisfied expression on his face. Coming along nicely, he said. What do you think so far, Bev? Hearing my name in his deep voice sent another of those strange little flutters through me. It's beautiful, I said honestly, so much more modern than my old one. Sometimes modern is good, he said, his eyes meeting mine for a moment longer than necessary. Change can be refreshing. I looked away first, suddenly finding the pattern of my bedspread intensely interesting. Would you like more coffee? I asked, desperate to put some distance between us to clear my head from whatever madness was overtaking me. That would be great, Jake replied. This next part gets a bit trickier. Installing the sliding mechanisms for the doors. Caffeine will help. As I picked up the tray with our mubs, I caught sight of our reflection in the mirror on my dresser. Jakey kneeling beside the half-built wardrobe, me standing nearby with the tray in my hands. For a split second, I saw us as strangers might, a handsome young man and an older woman in a bedroom, the unmade bed looming large in the background. I hurried downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest for no reason I wanted to admit. This was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. He was here to build a wardrobe, nothing more. He was being polite and friendly because that was his job. And I was what? Starved for attention. Missing a man's presence in my life. Having some kind of senior moment. In the kitchen, I poured fresh coffee into clean mugs, my hands trembling slightly. Get a grip, Beverly, I whispered to myself. You're old enough to be his mother, grandmother even. But as I climbed the stairs with the fresh coffee, I couldn't deny the nervous energy coursing through me. The heightened awareness of every sensation, the carpet under my feet, the weight of the tray in my hands, the scent of my perfume mixing with the aroma of coffee, and most of all, I couldn't deny the anticipation I felt about walking back into that bedroom where Jake waited. What in heaven's name was happening to me? Fresh coffee, I announced, stepping back into the bedroom with a cheerfulness I didn't quite feel. My heart was still doing that foddery thing like a hummingbird was trapped in my chest. Jake looked up from where he was measuring the inside of the wardrobe frame. Perfect timing, he said, setting down his tape measure and stretching his back. I couldn't help but notice the way his uniform shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. I was just about to tackle the trickiest part. Oh, I handed him a mug, careful to avoid brushing his fingers with mine. What's so tricky about it? The sliding door tracks have to be perfectly aligned, he explained, taking a grateful sip of coffee. Otherwise, the doors catch or jump the track. It's all about precision. I nodded, perching on the edge of my bed again. Sounds like you need steady hands. And patience, Jake added with a smile. Lots of patience. Most guys rush this part and end up having to do it twice. He set his mug down and picked up a level. My dad taught me to take my time with the important stuff. Measure twice, cut once. That was his motto. David said the exact same thing, I replied, surprised. He was always so careful with his projects. Jake nodded approvingly. Your husband sounds more and more like someone I would have respected. He positioned the level against the top of the wardrobe frame. So these sliding doors will have mirrors on them. That was a good choice. They'll reflect light around the room. My daughter's idea, I admitted. I was perfectly happy with regular doors, but Sarah insisted mirrors would open up the space or some such nonsense she picked up from those ho shows. Your daughter knows her stuff, Jake said, marking something with a pencil. And hey, now you won't have to walk to the bathroom to check how you look. I laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised me with its force. At my age, mirrors aren't always a woman's friend. Jake paused what he was doing and looked at me directly, his expression serious. Age is just a number, Bev, and from where I'm standing, you've got nothing to worry about. The compliment, so unexpected and sincere, left me speechless. Heat crept up my neck and into my cheeks. I couldn't remember the last time a man had paid me a compliment that wasn't about my cooking or my gardening skills. That's very sweet of you to say, I finally managed, looking down at my coffee. But these old eyes of mine can still see just fine. Jake went back to his measuring, but I could swear I saw a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sometimes we don't see ourselves clearly. My mom's the same way, beautiful woman, but all she sees are the wrinkles. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I watched in silence as Jake continued working. He was installing the top track for the sliding doors now, his movements precise and confident. There was something mesmerizing about watching someone who was truly skilled at their craft. So, tell me about your grandkids, Jake said conversationally as he worked. You mentioned you had 4. Grateful for the change in subject, I launched into proud grandmother mode. Sarah has twins, Jason and Jessica. They're 16 now, if you can believe it. And Michael has 2 little ones. Emma is 8 and Tyler just turned 6. They're the light of my life, though I don't see them nearly as often as I'd like. They live far away. Jake asked, now measuring for the bottom track. Sarah and the twins are in Seattle. Michael and his family are closer over in Vancouver, but with school and sports and everything else, weekends get busy. I sighed, thinking of how empty the house felt between visits. That's how it goes though. Life moves on. Kids grow up, have their own lives. Still, 4 grandkids. That's pretty special. Jake said family's important. My mom's always saying she can't wait for me to settle down and give her grandchildren, but I told her not to hold her breath. He chuckled, shaking his head. Haven't found the right person yet, I guess. I felt an irrational surge of relief at his words, followed immediately by confusion at my own reaction. What did it matter to me if this young man was single or not? The right person comes along when you least expect it, I heard myself saying. David and I met at a gas station of all places. My car had a flat tire and he stopped to help. Wasn't looking for luck that day, just trying to get to work on time. Jake smiled, beginning to screw the bottom track into place. That's a great story. But you never looked at flat tires the same way again. Never did, I agreed, smiling at the memory. Changed the whole course of my life. That flat tire did. Funny how life works that way, isn't it? Jake said, his voice thoughtful. The smallest things can lead to the biggest changes. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and something unspoken seemed to pass between us. I looked away first, my heart doing that ridiculous fluttering again. This was silly. Beyond silly. I was a grandmother, for heaven's sake. Could you help me with this next part? Jake asked, interrupting my thoughts. I need to slide this big shelf into place, but it's a tight fit. Of course, I said, setting my coffee aside and moving to where he indicated. The shelf was large and unwieldy, and as I helped him maneuver it, our arms brushed against each other. I tried to ignore the warmth that spread through me at the contact. Perfect. Now, if you can just hold it right there, Jake instructed, positioning himself to attach the shelf to the brackets he'd installed. His face was close to mine now, close enough that I could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Could smell the clean scent of his aftershave. This old-style joinery is actually better than the modern stuff, he commented, working to secure the shelf. Sometimes the old ways are still the best, you know. Yes. I agreed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Yes, they are. We worked together for several minutes, sliding shelves into place, attaching rods for hanging clothes. The wardrobe was taking shape, becoming something beautiful and functional. There was a certain intimacy to the process. Creating something together in the quiet of my bedroom. Jake was trying to fit a particularly large piece into a tight space now, adjusting the angle repeatedly. Almost, he muttered, applying firm pressure. Suddenly, with a loud click, the piece slid perfectly into place. It went in, I exclaimed without thinking, then immediately felt my face flame as I realized how that could sound. There was a beat of silence, and then our eyes met. I saw the moment of recognition in his gaze, the awareness of the double meaning. For a horrible second, I thought he might laugh at me, or worse, be embarrassed for this old woman and her accidental innuendo. Instead, his lips curved into a small smile, his eyes never leaving mine. Perfect fit, he said quietly. The air between us seemed charged suddenly, like the atmosphere before a summer storm. I was acutely aware of how close we were standing, of the sound of our breathing in the quiet room, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to my lips, before returning to my eyes. I needed to say something, do something to break this strange spell. I should check on lunch, I stammered, taking a step back. You must be getting hungry after all this work. Jake blinked, and whatever moment had been building between us dissipated like morning fog. That would be great, he said, his voice returning to its professional tone. I've got a good handle on things here now. As I hurried out of the room, my heart pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just my bedroom that was being transformed today. I need to pause for a moment and ask you something important. Have you ever felt this way, too? That unexpected flutter in your chest when someone looks at you, really looks at you, after you'd convinced yourself those feelings belong to a younger version of yourself, like waking up a part of you that had been sleeping for so long. If this story has touched something in you, please leave a comment saying, "I deserve to feel alive." Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today, to know they're not alone, that someone else understands their silent struggle. I read every comment, and I promise you sharing your truth helps heal not just yourself, but others walking this same difficult path. Now let me tell you what happened next. I stood in my kitchen, hands pressed against the cool countertop trying to collect myself. What was I doing? What was I thinking? This was completely inappropriate. He was half my age, for heaven's sake. He was here to do a job, nothing more. I was imagining things, reading into innocent comments and actions because I was lonely. And if you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. But even as I tried to talk sense into myself, I couldn't deny the electricity I'd felt in that bedroom. The way my skin had tingled when he accidentally brushed against me. The way his eyes had held mine. It had been so long since I'd felt anything like this. This awareness, this aliveness. And the scariest part, I didn't want it to stop. I busied myself in the kitchen, pulling out bread, sliced turkey, cheese, and lettuce for sandwiches. My hands worked in autopilot while my mind raced in circles. Part of me wanted to call Sarah, to hear her practical voice tell me I was being ridiculous. Another part was mortified at the mere thought of admitting these feelings to my daughter. What would she think of her mother? What would anyone think? Get a grip, Beverly, I muttered to myself, slicing a tomato with more force than necessary. He's being nice because it's his job. Don't make a fool of yourself. I arranged the sandwiches on plates, added some potato chips, Lay's Original, the kind I'd always kept around, because they were David's favorite, and poured 2 glasses of iced tea. Just a normal lunch for a hardworking young man. Nothing special. Nothing that suggested I was feeling anything beyond the appropriate gratitude for his professional services. By the time I carried the tray upstairs, I had convinced myself that I had imagined the entire charged moment. Temporary insanity brought on by loneliness and the disruption of my routine. I hope turkey sandwiches are okay, I said, stepping back into the bedroom. I should have asked if you had any dietary restrictions. Seems like everyone these days is gluten-free or vegan or something. Jake looked up from where he was installing one of the mirrored doors. Turkey sandwiches sound perfect, he said, wiping his hands on a cloth before taking the plate I offered. And don't worry, I eat everything. Mom says I have a cast iron stomach. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, him perched on the edge of my hope chest, and me on the bed, both of us eating our lunch. The awkwardness I had felt downstairs began to dissolve. Maybe I really had imagined that moment between us. This is coming along beautifully, I commented, nodding toward the wardrobe. It really was impressive how much progress he had made. The basic structure was complete. Most of the interior shelves and hanging rods were installed, and one of the mirrored sliding doors was already in place. Should be finished in another hour or so. Jake replied between bites. Then I'll need to remove all the old pieces. Your old wardrobe is pretty heavy, solid oak, not like the particle board they use these days. Will you be able to manage it by yourself? I asked, concerned. Some of those pieces are awfully heavy. I've got it, he assured me with an easy confidence. Part of the job, though I might need you to hold the door open for me when I carry out the larger sections. I nodded, secretly pleased to have some small role to play in the process. Of course. When we finished eating, Jake insisted on taking the plates downstairs himself. You cooked, I'll clean, he said, gathering our dishes. My mom would tan my hide if I let a lady clear my plate. Your mother raised you right, I said, smiling despite myself. She did her best. He agreed with a grin. Be right back. While he was downstairs, I took the opportunity to check my appearance in the bathroom mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright. I looked different somehow, less faded. I smoothed my hair, pinched some color into my cheeks, and even reapplied my lipstick. Actions I immediately felt foolish about. What was I doing priming for the furniture assembler? When Jake returned, he went straight back to work. Focusing intently on installing the second mirrored door, I watched as he carefully aligned the wheels with the track, making minute adjustments until they rolled smoothly. Perfect, he said with satisfaction, sliding the door back and forth a few times to test it. Now, let's get that old wardrobe out of here. As he began carrying the dismantled pieces of my old wardrobe out of the room, I held the doors open for him as promised. Each time he passed me, I caught the clean scent of his aftershave, mingled now with the faintest hint of honest sweat. It was a surprisingly appealing combination. The base of the old wardrobe was the heaviest piece, and Jake had to maneuver it carefully through the doorway. "If you could just hold the door all the way back," he instructed, lifting the massive oak piece. I pressed myself against the wall, holding the door as wide as possible. Even so, the space was tight, and as Jake passed through, his body came within inches of mine. He paused, adjusting his grip, and for a brief moment we were almost chest to chest, the wardrobe base between us. "Sorry about this," he murmured, his face close to mine, tight squeeze. "It's fine," I managed to reply. Though my voice sounded breathless even to my own ears, I could see the individual lashes framing his eyes, the slight stubble on his jawline that had emerged since loaning. Time seemed to slow down, stretching this moment into something significant and weighty. Finally, Jake maneuvered through the doorway and continued down the hall. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my heart pounding in my chest. This was getting out of hand. I needed to pull myself together. When Jake returned for the last pieces, he was slightly out of breath, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead from the exertion. "Almost done with the heavy lifting," he said cheerfully. "Then just a few finishing touches on the new wardrobe." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I watched as he carried out the final pieces of my old bedroom set, the furniture that had been part of my life with David for so many years. I should have felt sad seeing it go. Instead, I felt something like anticipation. Back in the bedroom, Jake put the final touches on the new wardrobe, adjusting the doors, making sure the drawers slid smoothly, wiping down the mirrors. "There we go," he said at last, stepping back to admire his work. "What do you think?" I approached the wardrobe, running my hand along its smooth, modern surface. The mirrors reflected the afternoon light, making the room seem larger and brighter. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "So different from what I'm used to, but beautiful." "Change can be good," Jake said, his voice gentle. He was standing close to me again. Both of us reflected in the mirrored doors. The contrast between us was stark, him tall and broad-shouldered in his uniform, me smaller, softer, my silver hair catching the light. Sometimes I agreed, watching our reflections. Sometimes change is necessary. Our eyes met in the mirror, and that electricity was back crackling in the air between us. This time I couldn't dismiss it as imagination. There was something happening here. Something unexpected and probably inappropriate and definitely terrifying. "I should probably start putting my clothes away," I said, breaking the moment. "Thank you for all your hard work." Jake nodded, beginning to gather his tools. "My pleasure, Bev." Really, there was something in the way he said my name. Something warm and personal that made my stomach do a little flip. I busied myself with folding a sweater that had been lying on the bed, trying to distract myself from these confusing feelings. "Will you need help arranging things inside?" Jake asked, closing his toolbox. "The height of the hanging rods can be adjusted if you need." "I think I can manage," I replied, though part of me wanted to say yes to find a reason for him to stay longer. "You've done more than enough already." Jake nodded, picking up his toolbox. It was time for him to go, and I felt an irrational disappointment settling over me. This was ridiculous. I was acting like a lovesick teenager, not a mature widow of 65. "Well, I guess that's it, then," he said, hesitating by the bedroom door. "I'll just need you to sign off on the work order downstairs." "Of course," I said, following him out of the room. As we walked down the stairs together, I was acutely aware of his presence ahead of me, of the breadth of his shoulders, of the graceful way he moved despite his size. In the living room, Jake pulled out a digital tablet for me to sign. "Just need your signature here," he said, handing it to me along with a stylus to confirm you're satisfied with the installation. "Very satisfied," I said immediately, regretting my choice of words. I quickly signed my name on the screen, hoping he wouldn't notice the slight tremor in my hand. "Perfect," Jake said, taking back the tablet. He hesitated again, seeming reluctant to leave. "It was really nice meeting you, Beverly. I enjoyed working with you today." "Likewise," I replied, walking him to the front door. "Thank you for being so patient with me. I know I'm not the most tech-savvy customer you've had." Jake smiled, a dimple appearing in his cheek again. You were a breeze compared to some folks. And you make a mean turkey sandwich. We both laughed, and I felt that strange youthful buoyancy in my chest again. When had I last felt this way? Decades ago surely. At the door, Jake extended his hand. Take care, Bev. I placed my hand in his, expecting a quick, professional handshake. Instead, he held my hand for just a beat longer than necessary, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that took my breath away. You, too, Jake, I managed to say. And then he was gone, walking down my front path to his truck parked at the curb. I closed the door slowly, leaning against it for support, my heart racing like I'd run a marathon. What in heaven's name had just happened? I spent the rest of that Wednesday in a strange daze, moving through my house like a sleepwalker. I heated up leftover casserole for dinner, but barely tasted it. I tried watching my favorite detective show, but couldn't follow the plot. When Sarah called to ask how the wardrobe installation went, I gave vague, distracted answers that prompted her to ask if I was feeling all right. Just tired, honey, I assured her. It was a busy day with all the furniture moving. After hanging up, I wandered into my bedroom, drawn like a magnet to the new wardrobe. It stood tall and sleek against the wall, its mirrored doors reflecting the soft glow of my bedside lamp. I slid one door open, ran my fingers along the smooth interior shelves, and breathed in the scent of new wood and fresh paint. But what I was really doing, if I'm being completely honest with myself, was looking for traces of him. Some lingering presence of Jake Reynolds, the young man who had upended my quiet widow's existence in the span of a few hours. This is ridiculous. I told my reflection in the mirrored door. Absolutely ridiculous. My reflection didn't argue, but it didn't look particularly convinced either. The woman staring back at me had bright eyes and flushed cheeks. A woman who looked more alive than she had in years. I slept fitfully that night, tossing and turning in the same bed I'd shared with David for 4 decades. Several times I woke from dreams I couldn't quite remember, but that left me feeling restless and oddly expectant. When morning finally came, I got up earlier than usual, made coffee, and tried to settle back into my normal routine. But normal had somehow shifted underneath me like sand eroding at the beach. I found myself taking extra care with my appearance, choosing my nicest casual slacks instead of my usual house dress, applying my makeup with greater precision, even dabbing on white diamonds behind my ears, though I had no plans to leave the house. Around 10:00, I was watering the African violets on my kitchen windowsill when the doorbell rang. My heart leaped into my throat, though I immediately scolded myself for the reaction. It was probably just the mail carrier with a package. Or maybe Jehovah's Witnesses making their rounds through the neighborhood. I smoothed my hair, straightened my blouse, and walked to the door with measured steps, refusing to rush like some eager teenager. When I peered through the peephole, my carefully maintained composure shattered instantly. Jake Reynolds stood on my front porch, not in his Woodward's uniform, but in jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt that made his eyes look even darker than I remembered. I opened the door, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the riot of butterflies in my stomach. Jake, I said, proud that my voice sounded steady, did I forget to sign something yesterday? He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. No, nothing like that. He ran a hand through his hair, musing it slightly. I was in the neighborhood checking on another installation, and thought I'd stop by. Make sure everything's working properly with the wardrobe. The doors can sometimes need adjusting after a day or two. It was a paper-thin excuse, and we both knew it. Woodward's didn't send their installers on follow-up house calls for simple furniture assembly, but instead of calling him on it, I found myself stepping back, opening the door wider. That's very thoughtful of you, I said. Would you like to come in and check? Jakey's smile returned, relief evident in his eyes. I would, thanks. He followed me inside, closing the door behind him. The house felt different with him in it today, more charged somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm. This wasn't a professional visit, and we both knew it, though neither of us seemed ready to acknowledge that fact out loud. We climbed the stairs in silence, each step increasing the tension between us. When we reached the bedroom, I hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how intimate this space was. My unmade bed was clearly visible, the sheets still tangled from my restless night. Jake seemed to sense my hesitation. I can come back another time, he offered quietly, if this isn't a good moment. No, it's fine, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Please come in. He stepped into the bedroom, his eyes going immediately to the wardrobe. It looks good, he said, sliding the doors back and forth to check their alignment. No issues with the tracking system. How are the drawers working for you? I watched as he went through the motions of inspecting his handiwork, both of us playing along with this pretense. Everything works perfectly, I told him. You did a wonderful job. Jake nodded, closing the wardrobe doors gently. He turned to face me, and the pretense fell away. That's not really why I came, he admitted, his voice lower now, more intimate. My heart hammered against my ribs. I know, I said simply. We stood there just looking at each across my bedroom, the air between us thick with unspoken things. He was so young, so handsome in that effortless way of youth. And I was what? A 65-year-old widow with silver hair and laugh lines who still kept her dead husband's favorite chips in the pantry out of habit. This is crazy. I whispered more to myself than to him. Probably, he agreed, taking a step closer to me. I couldn't stop thinking about you last night. Kept telling myself it was inappropriate that I was imagining things. You weren't imagining anything, I admitted, surprising myself with my honesty. But Jake, I'm old enough to be your mother. He took another step toward me, close enough now that I could see the different shades of brown in his eyes. Age is just a number, Beverly, and how you make me feel, that's the only thing that matters to me right now. And how do I make you feel? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Alive, he said simply, his gaze never leaving mine. You make me feel alive. The word hung between us, alive, and I realized with sudden clarity that it was exactly how I felt, too, more alive than I had in 7 years. More seen, more present in my own body. I have no idea what we're in here, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I, Jake admitted with a small smile. But I'd like to find out if you want to. He was giving me an out. I realized a chance to end this now, to return to my quiet, predictable existence. All I had to do was say the word and he would walk away. We could both pretend this strange attraction had never existed. The sensible thing would be to take that out, to thank him politely for checking on the wardrobe, and show him to the door, to return to my book club and my gardening, and my weekly calls with my grandchildren. To be the respectable widow everyone expected me to be for the rest of my days. But in that moment, looking into Jake's eyes, I didn't want to be sensible. I wanted to feel everything, the bad, the complicated, the messy. I wanted to remember what it was like to have my heart race when someone walked into a room, to feel desire and be desired in return. I want to find out too, I said softly, the words feeling like both a surrender and a victory. Jake's face broke into a smile that made him look even younger, if that was possible. Slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, he raised his hand and gently cupped my cheek. His palm was warm against my skin, slightly calloused from his work. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering closed for a brief moment. May I kiss you, Beverly? He asked, his voice reverent. I opened my eyes to find him looking at me with an intensity that took my breath away. In his gaze, I didn't see pity or some misguided sense of charity for a lonely old woman. I saw genuine desire, genuine interest. He was seeing me, not just my age or my status as a widow, but me. Yes, I whispered, hardly believing my own boldness. Jake leaned down, closing the distance between us. His lips met mine in a kiss that started gentle, almost tentative. For a moment, we stayed like that, barely touching, both of us suspended in disbelief at what was happening. Then, as if some invisible barrier had suddenly dissolved, the kiss deepened. His arms encircled my waist, drawing me closer, and I found my hands moving to his shoulders, feeling the strength there. It had been so long, so incredibly long, since I'd been held like this. Since I'd been kissed like this with passion and desire, rather than the comfortable affection of a decades-long marriage. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, I felt dizzy with sensation. Jake rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed as if he too needed a moment to process what had just happened. I've been wanting to do that since the moment you opened your door yesterday, he confessed, his voice husky. I laughed softly, surprising myself. If it makes you feel any better, I've been wanting you too. His answering smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. In that moment, standing in my bedroom with this young man's arms around me, I felt a happiness I'd almost forgotten was possible. A lightness that made the years fall away, if only temporarily. I knew we had 1,000 things to talk about, 1,000 complications to navigate, but for now, in this stolen moment out of time, I allowed myself to simply feel, to be not a widow, not a grandmother, not a retiree, but simply a woman experiencing the sweet shock of unexpected connection. Whatever came next, I was ready to embrace it fully. The days that followed were like something from someone else's life. Certainly not from the quiet, predictable existence I'd settled into after David's death. Jake came by almost every evening after work, sometimes still in his Woodward's uniform, other times in jeans and those casual button-downs that made his eyes look impossibly dark and warm. One evening, about a week after our first kiss, he arrived with a small bouquet of daisies tied with simple twine. Not roses or orchids or anything flashy, just humble daisies that looked like they might have been plucked from someone's garden. "These reminded me of you," he said, looking almost shy as he handed them to me. Beautiful without trying too hard. I buried my face in the flowers to hide my blush, breathing in their fresh, honest scent. No man had brought me flowers in years, not since David's early onset forgetfulness had stolen away such gestures long before his heart finally gave out. We fell into a routine of sorts. Jake would come over after his last installation of the day. Sometimes I'd cook dinner. Nothing fancy, just the home-style meals I'd made for decades. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes, chicken and dumplings, the kind of food that seemed to delight him after years of bachelor meals and his mother's cooking. Other times, he'd bring takeout from little places I'd never tried. Thai food with flavors that danced on my tongue. Authentic tacos from a food truck run by a Mexican family in his neighborhood. Wood-fired pizza that made my grocery store frozen variety seemed like cardboard by comparison. We'd talk for hours sitting at my kitchen table, or on the couch in my living room. He told me about growing up in Portland, about losing his father to a heart attack, similar to the one that took David, about his dreams of one day having his own furniture-making business, instead of just assembling other people's designs. I shared stories about my teaching days, about raising Sarah and Michael, about the struggles and joys of my 42 years with David. To my surprise, Jake listened with genuine interest, never seeming bored by tales of a life that had begun before his parents were even born. "Do you think he'd be angry?" I asked one evening as we sat on my back porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight. "David, I mean about us." The word felt strange on my tongue. Us. As if I still couldn't quite believe there was an us to speak of. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know," he finally said. "I never had the privilege of meeting him, but from everything you've told me, he loved you deeply and wanted your happiness above all else. So, no, I don't think he'd be angry. Maybe a little surprised," he added with a small smile, "but not angry." I nodded, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "He always did say I was too stubborn for my own good," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That I never did things the expected way." Jake reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. Then maybe he wouldn't be surprised at all. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself changing in subtle ways. I bought new clothes for the first time in years. Nothing outlandish, just some blouses and colors I'd never tried before. A pair of jeans that actually fit instead of hanging loosely on my frame. I even made an appointment at the salon and got my first new hairstyle since retiring from teaching. When Sarah came over to help me pick out paint for the bedroom, another change I'd impulsively decided to make, she stopped in the doorway, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. "Mom," she said, her head tilting slightly, "you look different." "Good, different. I haven't seen that sparkle in your eyes since before Dad got sick." I busied myself with the paint samples, avoiding her gaze. "Just trying to take better care of myself," I said non-committally. "Marge from church says it's important not to let yourself go, even at our age." Sarah seemed to accept this explanation, though I caught her watching me thoughtfully throughout the afternoon, as we debated between the oceanside blue and tranquil tide for the bedroom walls. I wasn't ready to tell her about Jake. Wasn't even sure what there was to tell. Was this a relationship, a fling, some kind of mutually beneficial delusion? Whatever it was, it felt too precious, too fragile to expose to the harsh light of other people's judgment just yet. The bedroom transformation became a symbol of the changes happening inside me. The walls, which had been the same faded yellow since the Reagan administration, were now a soft, tranquil blue. The heavy curtains that had hung at the windows for decades were replaced with lighter, airier panels that let in more light. A new bedspread in shades of cream and blue replaced the floral pattern I'd slept under for 25 years. Only the photograph of David on my nightstand remained unchanged, his smiling face watching over the room's metamorphosis, with what I chose to interpret as approval. The first time Jake and I made love was in this newly transformed room on a rainy Sunday afternoon, with the gentle patter of droplets against the window, providing a natural soundtrack to our tentative exploration of each other. I had been nervous, almost backing out at the last minute, suddenly acutely aware of my aging body with its wrinkles and softness, and the marks left by childbearing and time. "You are beautiful," Jake whispered, his hands gentle as they traced the contours of my body. "Every line, every curve, every mark, they're all part of you, and you're beautiful." And somehow, miraculously, I believed him. In his eyes, in his touch, I found no judgment, no comparison, no disappointment, only genuine desire and affection that made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't in years. Afterwards, lying in his arms with my head on his chest, I listened to the strong, steady beating of his heart and felt a contentment that went beyond physical satisfaction. It was the simple joy of connection, of being truly seen and accepted. "Penny, for your thoughts," Jake murmured, his fingers playing idly with my silver hair. I smiled against his skin. "I was just thinking that life has the strangest timing. All those years I thought certain chapters were closed forever, only to find they were just waiting for the right moment to begin." "I like that," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. Life saving the best chapters for when we least expect them. As weeks turned into months, my renewed relationship with myself, with my body, my desires, my right to happiness continued to flourish alongside whatever this was developing between Jake and me. I started taking better care of myself in all ways, not just appearance, but health too. I joined a gentle yoga class at the senior center. Started taking daily walks around the neighborhood. Paid more attention to what I ate. "You're glowing, Bev," my friend Marge commented after church one Sunday. "Must be all that yoga. Maybe I should give it a try." I just smiled, keeping my secrets close. The truth was, I was glowing with renewed purpose, with joy, with the simple pleasure of feeling desired and desirable again after years of invisibility. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. I had moments of crippling doubt, usually late at night after Jake had gone home. What was I doing with a man 35 years my junior? Was this just some kind of midlife, or rather late life crisis? Was I making a complete fool of myself? And what about Jake? Was this just some kind of Florence Nightingale syndrome? Some misplaced desire to care for an older woman like he cared for his mother? But each time I saw him again, those doubts would recede like morning mist in sunshine. The way his face lit up when I opened the door, the genuine interest in his questions about my day, the respect with which he treated me, never condescending, never treating me like someone fragile or diminished by age. One evening, about 3 months after that first wardrobe delivery, Jake and I were lying in my bed, the blue walls now familiar around us. We had just made love slowly and tenderly, and I was tracing lazy patterns on his chest with my fingertips. "I have something to tell you," he said, his voice serious enough to make me look up at his face. "I've been offered a promotion at Woodward's, manager of installations for the entire Portland area." "Jake, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "You deserve it." He didn't smile. "It means more money, better hours, no more weekend installations." "That sounds perfect," I said, not understanding his somber mood. "It also means I won't be doing installations myself anymore," he continued, "just managing the crews." "Ah, now I understood. So, you wouldn't have met me," I said softly, "if you'd had this job 3 months ago." He nodded, turning on his side to face me fully. "Exactly. And that scares me, Bev. The thought that we might never have met, that some random scheduling decision brought me to your door that day." He trailed off, his eyes intense. "I can't imagine not knowing you now." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just a fling to him. This wasn't just some young man's curiosity or temporary fascination. This was something real, something significant. I feel the same way, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes it terrifies me how important you've become to me. How quickly you've become part of my life. He didn't just have one son, he had two, maybe more. If you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe now. Jake's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from my face. Life doesn't give us timelines. Bev doesn't tell us when we're supposed to feel certain things, meet certain people. It just happens when it happens. Even when it happens at 65, I asked, a hint of my lingering insecurity showing through. Especially then, he replied, pulling me closer. Because by then, you know exactly who you are and what you want. No games, no pretending. As I settled into his embrace, I marveled at the strange, wonderful turns life could take. 3 months ago, I had been a faded widow, living in the shadows of my memories. Now, I was a woman rediscovering passion, joy, and possibility. All because of a wardrobe delivery, and the courage to say yes to unexpected happiness. It was bound to happen sooner, or later in a neighborhood like mine, where folks have lived side by side for decades, and everyone knows everyone else's business. Word gets around faster than a wildfire in August, especially when it concerns a widow of a certain age, and a man young enough to be her son. The first crack in our private bubble came on a Sunday afternoon in early June. I was in the kitchen preparing a roast for Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd maintained even through the lonely years after David's passing. Sarah and her twins were coming over, a monthly ritual that had become even more precious to me now that I had secrets to keep. The twins, Jason and Jessica, had just turned 16 and were at that age where they viewed visits to Grandma's house as slightly less torturous than dental work. But they came dutifully, if sullenly, tapping away at their phones and answering my questions about school with the bare minimum of syllables. I was peeling potatoes at the sink when I heard the distinctive rumble of Jake's motorcycle pulling up outside. My heart did that silly little dance it always did at the sound. Even after months of our relationship, romance, I still didn't have the right word for what we were to each other. We hadn't planned to see each other until Monday. Jake usually gave me space on family Sundays, understanding the delicate balance I was trying to maintain, but he'd texted earlier about a broken shelf bracket he'd ordered for my wardrobe. And I told him he could drop it by any time. I wiped my hands on a dishcloth and hurried to the front door, opening it just as Jake was removing his helmet. The June sunshine caught in his dark hair, making the few strands of premature silver at his temples gleam. He smiled when he saw me. That smile that still made my knees feel like they belonged to someone 30 years younger. Hey there, he said, climbing the porch steps. Sorry to interrupt your Sunday, just wanted to drop this off. He held up a small paper bag with the Woodward's logo. It's no trouble, I assured him, acutely aware that we were standing in full view of Mrs. Henderson's front window across the street. That woman had been the neighborhood's one-person surveillance system since the Carter administration. Would you like to come in for a minute? I'm just preparing dinner for Sarah and the twins. Jake hesitated, understanding the implications of entering my home on a family day. I don't want to intrude on your family time. Just for a minute, I insisted, holding the door wider. I want to make sure it's the right part before you leave. He nodded and followed me inside, setting his helmet on the small table in the entryway, a gesture that had become habitual over the past months. I led him to the kitchen where the smell of pot roast filled the air. Smells amazing in here, Jake commented, setting the paper bag on the counter. Just an old family recipe, I said, returning to my potato peeling. Nothing fancy. Jake leaned against the counter, watching me work with that attentive gaze that always made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. Need any help? I'm pretty good with a peeler. I was about to hand him one when I heard the front door open, and the sound of teenage voices bickering in the hallway. Grandma. Jason's being a total Jessica's complaint died on her lips as she entered the kitchen and saw Jake. Her eyes widened, darting between us with teenage perception that missed nothing. Oh, she said. A universe of speculation in that single syllable. Jason appeared behind her, nearly bumping into his sister when she stopped abruptly. What's your problem? He started, then followed her gaze to Jake. Oh, hey, you're the motorcycle guy. My heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. Motorcycle guy. Jason shrugged, already losing interest in heading for the refrigerator. Yeah. I've seen him leaving here a couple times when Mom drops us off early. Sarah appeared in the doorway then, her arms full of the homemade rolls she'd promised to bring. Her eyes took in the scene, Jake by the counter, me frozen with a half-pelleted potato in my hand, the twins watching with undisguised curiosity. Hello, she said carefully, setting the rolls on the table. I don't believe we've met. Jake straightened up, extending his eyes with confidence I'd always admired. Jake Reynolds, ma'am. I'm a friend of your mother's. Sarah shook his hand automatically, her expression polite but guarded. Sarah Mitchell, Beverly's daughter. An awkward silence descended on the kitchen, broken only by the sound of Jason rummaging in the refrigerator. Jake just stopped by to drop off a replacement part for my wardrobe. I explained, my voice sounding unnaturally high to my own ears. He was the installer from Woodward's a few months back. Remember when we bought the new bedroom set? Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Jake. I remember. She turned to the twins. Jason, Jessica, why don't you two set the table? The good china, please. The twins, clearly sensing the tension and reluctant to miss whatever adult drama was unfolding, lingered until Sarah's pointed look finally sent them shuffling toward the dining room. I should be going, Jake said, glancing at me with a mixture of apology and concern. Don't want to intrude on your family dinner. Of course, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thank you for bringing the part by. Nice to meet you, Sarah, Jake added, nodding respectfully to my daughter. Sarah managed a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Likewise. I walked Jake to the door, acutely aware of Sarah's gaze burning into my back. At the threshold, out of sight from the kitchen, Jake gave my hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. Call me later, he murmured, not trusting my voice. As I watched him walk to his motorcycle, helmet in hand, I felt a sense of foreboding settle over me. The careful separation I'd maintained between my relationship with Jake and my role as mother and grandmother had just collapsed like a house of cards. When I returned to the kitchen, Sarah was arranging her homemade rolls in a basket, her movements precise and controlled. I picked up my potato peeler, trying to act as if nothing unusual had happened. So, Sarah said after a moment, her voice deceptively casual. A friend, huh? I kept my eyes on the potato in my hands. Yes, a friend. Sarah set down the basket with a bit more force than necessary. Mom, the motorcycle guy. Really? I looked up then, meeting my daughter's incredulous stare. His name is Jake, not the motorcycle guy. And yes, we've become friends since he installed the wardrobe. Friends, Sarah repeated, infusing the word with skepticism. Mom, he can't be more than 35. He's 30, I corrected automatically, then winced at my mistake. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. 30, good lord, Mom. He's closer to my age than yours. I sat down the peeler, suddenly tired of pretending. I'm well aware of the age difference, Sarah. I can do basic math. Do you have feelings for this man? Sarah asked, lowering her voice and glancing toward the dining room, where the twins were bickering over place settings. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I could deny it, brush it off as a casual friendship, and preserve the image my daughter had of me, the predictable, sensible widow devoted to her family memories. Or I could be honest, not just with Sarah but with myself. Yes, I said simply, I do. Sarah stared at me as it suddenly started speaking in tongues. Mom, be serious. He's half your age. What could you possibly have in common? More than you might think, I replied, feeling a strange calm settle over me now that the truth was out. He's kind, intelligent, respectful. He makes me laugh. He listens when I talk. And what exactly does he want from you? Sarah demanded, her protective instincts flaring. Because I find it hard to believe a 30-year-old man is interested in a woman in her 60s without some kind of agenda. The insinuation stung, but I kept my voice even. Not everyone sees age the way you do, Sarah. And not everyone has an ulterior motive. Oh, Mom. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. Can't you see how this looks? The neighbors are already talking. Jason's seen him leaving our house for heaven's sake. And why should I care what the neighbors think? I asked, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, being the perfect teacher, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. For once in my life, I'm doing something that makes me happy. Sarah looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Dad's only been gone 7 years, she said quietly, and I loved him every day of those 42 years we had together. I replied, my throat tight with emotion. I still love him. That will never change. But he's gone, Sarah, and I'm still here. Still alive. The word alive hung in the air between us. The same word Jake had used to describe how I made him feel, how he made me feel. Before Sarah could respond, the twins burst back into the kitchen, arguing about who had done more of the table setting. The moment of confrontation was over. But I knew this was just the beginning. The carefully compartmentalized aspects of my life were starting to collide, and there would be consequences to face. Throughout dinner, I could feel Sarah watching me, re-evaluating every gesture, every expression, as if trying to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with this new version who had feelings for a 30-year-old furniture installer. The twins, with their uncanny teenage radar for adult tension, were unusually quiet, exchanging meaningful looks across the table. As I served the apple pie I'd baked that morning, I realized with perfect clarity that I was at a crossroads. I could retreat back into the safe, respectable role of aging widow, or I could move forward into uncharted territory, a woman who refused to be defined solely by her age or her past. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure which path to take. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't willing to give up the joy Jake had brought back into my life without a fight. Not even for my beloved daughter's approval. The week following that Sunday dinner was one of the tensest I'd experienced since David's funeral. Sarah called every day, her voice careful and measured as she probed for more information about Jake. Was he really just a friend? How often did he come over? Did we go out in public together? Each question felt like a tiny paper cut, individually minor, but collectively painful. I'm just concerned, Mom, she said during one particularly strained conversation. You don't really know this man. What if he's taking advantage of you? Taking advantage how exactly? I asked, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. I'm not wealthy. I don't have some grand inheritance he's after. I'm just a retired teacher with a modest pension. There are other ways to take advantage of someone. Sarah replied delicately. I nearly laughed out loud at that. The idea that Jake was somehow manipulating me for physical reasons was almost comical. If anything, I sometimes worried I couldn't keep up with him, not the other way around. Sarah, honey, I said as gently as I could, I'm 65, not 95. I'm not senile or desperate or being coerced in any way. I'm making my own choices. My daughter sighed heavily on the other end of the line. I just don't want to see you get hurt or taken advantage of or talked about. And there it was, the real concern. What people would say. How it would look. The embarrassment of having a mother who wasn't behaving as a proper widow should. Meanwhile, my relationship with Jake continued. Though now with an added layer of complication, he was unfailingly supportive, never pressuring me one way or another about telling my family or going public. This is your call, Bev, he told me as we sat on my back porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. You've got more to lose here than I do. I understand if you want to keep things discreet. I studied his profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw, the slight bump on the bridge of his nose from a childhood injury. Is that what you want? Discretion? He turned to look at me, his eyes serious. What I want is to be with you, without having to sneak around like we're doing something wrong. But I know it's complicated with your family, with the neighbors. I don't want to make your life harder. His consideration only made me care for him more. Here was a man who could have been dating someone his own age, someone who wouldn't come with all this baggage and judgment. Yet, he chose to be with me. I think I said slowly that it's time to stop hiding. I'm too old for sneaking around. Either we're doing this, really doing this, or we're not. Jake's smile spread slowly across his face, lighting up his eyes. Really doing this sounds good to me. The decision made, I called both Sarah and Michael the next morning and invited them to Sunday dinner, with Jake as my official guest. Michael, who lived in Vancouver with his wife and 2 children, was surprised but less immediately judgmental than Sarah had been. A boyfriend, Mom? Really? He asked, sounding more bemused than alarmed. Well, good for you, I guess. Dad always did say you were full of surprises. Sarah was less enthusiastic but agreed to come. Though she made it clear she was reserving judgment. I just want to get to know him better, she said in a tone that suggested she was preparing for a cross-examination rather than a family dinner. I spent all day Saturday cooking, falling back on the comfort of familiar recipes to calm my nerves. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes. David's favorite Sunday meal, homemade rolls. Green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top that the grandkids loved. Apple pie for dessert made with Granny Smith's from the farmer's market. Jake arrived an hour before everyone else, looking both handsome and nervous in dark slacks and a blue button down that brought out his eyes. He carried a small bouquet of mixed flowers and a bottle of good wine. "You didn't have to bring anything," I told him as he handed me the flowers. "My mom raised me better than that," he replied with a smile, following me into the kitchen. "Besides, I want to make a good impression." I reached up to straighten his collar, a gesture that felt simultaneously maternal and intimate. "Just be yourself," I advised. That's what won me over. He caught my hand and pressed a kiss to my palm, an action so tender it made my heart ache. "Whatever happens today, Bev, I want you to know I'm Alan. This isn't some passing thing for me." The doorbell rang before I could respond. And just like that, the moment of truth arrived. Michael arrived first with his wife, Lisa, and their 2 children, Emma and Tyler. The kids immediately broke the ice by exclaiming over Jake's motorcycle, which he'd parked in driveway. "You ride that 8-year-old?" Emma asked, eyes wide with admiration. "Sure do," Jake replied, crouching down to her level. "Maybe someday when you're older, I could take you for a ride with your parents' permission, of course," he added quickly, glancing at Michael and Lisa. Tyler, ever the little businessman, even at 6, looked Jake up and down. "Is that your job? Riding motorcycles?" Jake laughed. "No, buddy, I work for a furniture company. I help build things like your grandma's new wardrobe upstairs." Michael stepped forward then, extending his hand. "So, you're the famous Jake." "I'm Michael, Beverly's son." The 2 men shook hands, sizing each other up with that peculiar male ritual of grip, strength, and eye contact. Whatever Michael saw in Jake seemed to satisfy him for the moment, as he nodded slightly before turning to Lisa with the kids' jackets. Sarah arrived last with the twins, her expression carefully neutral as she introduced herself and her children to Jake. Jason recognized him immediately as the motorcycle guy, which actually helped break some of the tension as Jake good-naturedly accepted the nickname. Dinner itself was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The younger kids peppered Jake with questions about his motorcycle and whether he had any pets. He didn't, but admitted to wanting a dog someday. The twins observed with typical teenage aloofness that barely concealed their fascination with the situation. Michael and Lisa made polite small talk while Sarah watched every interaction like a hawk studying potential prey. It wasn't until we were serving dessert that Michael finally addressed the elephant in the room. "So, Jake," he said, setting down his fork, "what exactly are your intentions toward my mother?" The table fell silent. Even the younger kids seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, pausing in their decimation of apple pie. Alamode, Jake set down his own fork and looked directly at Michael. "I care about your mother very much," he said simply. "She's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. I enjoy spending time with her, learning from her, making her laugh. My intention is to keep doing that for as long as she'll let me." Michael nodded slowly, processing this. "And the age difference doesn't bother you?" "Should it?" Jake countered, his voice respectful, but firm. "Your mother is vibrant, intelligent, kind, and yes, beautiful. Those qualities don't have an expiration date." I felt a flush creep up my neck at his words, touched beyond measure by his public declaration. Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "Mom's been through a lot," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "She lost Dad, her partner of over 40 years. She's vulnerable." Jake turned his attention to my daughter. "I would never take advantage of that vulnerability, Sarah. I respect your mother too much. And I respected your father too. Even though I never had the privilege of meeting him." "How can you say that?" Sarah challenged. "You never knew him." "Because I know his wife," Jake replied simply. "I know the kind of woman he loved for over 40 years. And I know how much she still loves him. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man he was." A heavy silence fell over the table. I looked around at the faces of my family. Michael thoughtful, Lisa quietly supportive, Sarah struggling with conflicting emotions, and the grandchildren watching this adult drama with wide eyes. Finally, Michael turned to me. "Mom, are you happy? Really happy?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I thought about the past several months, the renewed energy I felt each morning, the anticipation of seeing Jake, the rediscovery of desires and dreams I thought had died with David. The way I'd started taking care of myself again, making plans for the future instead of just marking time. Yes, I said, my voice clear and certain. More happy than I've been in a very long time. Michael nodded once decisively. Then that's what matters. Sarah didn't look entirely convinced, but she didn't argue further. As the evening went down and family members began to leave, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. I still think this is unusual, she said, choosing her words carefully. But I've never seen that look in your eyes before. Not even with Dad, if I'm being honest. Just be careful, Mom. I squeezed her hand, recognizing the gesture for the tentative acceptance it was. I will, honey. But sometimes the heart wants what it wants, even at 65. After everyone had gone, Jake helped me clean up the kitchen, moving around the space with a familiarity that spoke of our months together. As I loaded the dishwasher, I felt his arms encircle me from behind, his chin resting gently on top of my head. That went better than I expected, he murmured. I leaned back into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. Michael always was the more pragmatic one. Sarah will come around eventually, and if she doesn't, I turned in his arms to face him. Then she doesn't. I love my children dearly, but I've spent my entire adult life putting everyone else's needs and opinions before my own. It's time I live for me. Jake smiled, that wonderful smile that still made my heart skip a beat. I'm glad to hear it because I have a lot of plans for us, Beverly Mitchell. As I looked up into his eyes, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this unexpected turn my life had taken. At 65, when I thought all my great adventures were behind me, life had handed me one more chance at joy, and I was determined to grab it with both hands. It's been a little over a year now since Jake Reynolds walked through my front door with a toolbox in hand and unknowingly changed the course of my life. A year of discovery, of joy, of challenges overcome, and yes, sometimes moments of doubt. But mostly a year of feeling truly alive again. Life has a way of settling into new patterns, no matter how unconventional they might seem at first. What started as a secret, almost forbidden connection, has transformed into something normal, comfortable, though never boring. Jake and I have found our rhythm, a way of being together that honors both what we share and our individual lives. Jake still lives with his mother, helping her maintain the house and sharing expenses. I still live in the home where David and I raised our children. We spend most evenings and weekends together, sometimes at my place, occasionally at his when his mother visits her sister in Seattle. Neither of us has suggested moving in together. Not yet, anyway. Some boundaries still feel important to maintain, at least for now. Sarah has gradually come to accept our relationship, though I can tell she still finds it somewhat bewildering. At Christmas last year, she surprised me by including a gift for Jake under the tree. Nothing fancy, just a nice flannel shirt, but the gesture meant the world to both of us. Michael and his family have been more openly accepting, even inviting us to Emma's 9th birthday party as a couple. The neighbors still talk, of course. Mrs. Henderson across the street still peers through her curtains when Jake's motorcycle pulls into my driveway. But the whispers and raised eyebrows bother me less and less as time goes on. Perhaps that's one of the gifts of aging. The gradual liberation from caring what others think. My friend Marge from church finally cornered me after service one Sunday, and demanded to know what's going on with you, and that young man who picks you up sometimes. When I told her the truth, she was silent for a long moment before breaking into a wide grin. Well, glory be, she said, shaking her head in wonder. And here I've been wasting my time with vitamins when what I needed was a handsome young furniture installer. We both laughed until tears came to our eyes, standing there in the church parking lot like a couple of schoolgirls instead of women pushing 70. Jake took me to the coast last summer, my first real vacation since David died. We rented a small cottage overlooking the ocean in Cannon Beach, spent our days walking along the shore, collecting shells, and our evenings watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The first day, I was hesitant to wear a bathing suit, acutely aware of the contrast between my aging body and the toned, youthful figures on display all around us. But Jake, with his uncanny ability to read my insecurities, took my hand and led me down to a quieter stretch of beach. "The only thing that disappoints me," he said, his eyes holding mine, "is that you still can't see yourself through my eyes." Later that night, as we lay together in the small bedroom with the sound of waves crashing outside, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt so at peace. Not just since David died, but for years before that, through his illness, through the gradual shifts of a long marriage, through the empty nest and retirement, and all the transitions of later life. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. "About how unpredictable life is," I replied truthfully. "How you think you've got it all figured out, all mapped out," and then I gestured vaguely between us. He smiled, pulling me closer, "and then a furniture delivery changes everything." "Something like that," I agreed, resting my head on his chest. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be lying here with you now, I would have told them they were certifiably insane. "Life's funny that way," Jake murmured, his voice rumbling under my ear. "The best things are usually the ones you never see coming." One of the questions I get asked most often, usually by Sarah in her more skeptical moments, is what happens next? What about the future? What about when Jake wants children? What about when I'm 70, 80, facing the inevitable challenges of truly advanced age? The truth is, I don't know. None of us do really. Life offers no guarantees, no matter how conventional or safe our choices might seem. David and I had the most traditional, respectable marriage imaginable. And still, he was taken from me decades before we'd planned. When I voiced these concerns to Jake once, late at night when my insecurities tend to surface, he took my face between his hands with a gentleness that never fails to move me. "I chose to be with you knowing exactly who you are and where you are in life," he said, his eyes serious. "I'm not waiting for you to be something different or expecting you to change. I'm here now with you as you are because this is what I want." It wasn't a promise of forever. We're both too practical for that. But it was an affirmation of now, of the choice we make each day to be together, despite the raised eyebrows and whispered comments and occasional family tensions. And really, isn't that all any of us have? This moment, this choice, this opportunity to embrace joy when it presents itself, no matter how unexpected its packaging. I look at myself in the mirror sometimes. Really look, and I'm still surprised by what I see. The physical changes of this past year are subtle but real. I stand straighter. I take better care of my appearance. There's more color in my cheeks, more light in my eyes. But the most profound changes are the ones that don't show in the mirror. The rediscovery of passion and desire. The willingness to take risks. The liberation from others' expectations. The simple joy of waking up each morning with something to look forward to. Age, I've discovered, is a curious thing. In some ways, it limits us. My knees certainly protest more than they used to when I climb the stairs, and I won't be running any marathons in this lifetime. But in other, more important ways, age can be incredibly freeing if we let it be. I'm no longer the anxious young mother I was at 25, worried about doing everything right. Nor am I the stressed middle-aged woman I was at 45, juggling career and family and aging parents. At 66, I've lived enough, seen enough, lost enough to know what truly matters. And what matters, I found, is not what others think of my choices. It's not adhering to some invisible rule book about how widows should behave, or how relationships should look. What matters is being true to myself, honoring the love I shared with David while still embracing the life that stretches before me. A few weeks ago, on my 66th birthday, Jake organized a small party at my house. Nothing extravagant, just Sarah and the twins, Michael and his family, Marge from church, and a few other close friends who've come to accept our relationship. Jake's mother even came, a lovely woman named Eleanor, who, after an initially awkward introduction, whispered to me that she'd never seen her son so happy. As I looked around my living room that evening at the faces of the people I love most in this world, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of gratitude for David, and the beautiful life we shared. For my children and the adults they've become. For my grandchildren and the joy they bring. And yes, for Jake and the unexpected gift of presence in my life. When it came time to blow out the candles, Jake asked what I'd wished for. "That's between me and the birthday gods," I teased, remembering how my mother had always said wishes didn't come true if you told. But the truth was, I didn't wish for anything at all. Not more time, not better health, not freedom from judgment, or easier relationships. Because in that moment, surrounded by love, both old and new, expected and surprising, I realized I already had everything I could possibly need. Oh, and that phrase that started this whole story. At 65, I screamed. It was big and went in fast. Well, that was indeed the shelf for my new wardrobe, the one Jake was installing that first day. The shelf that was so big I was sure it wouldn't fit. But somehow Jake made it work. When it finally slid into place with a satisfying click, I did let out a little scream of surprise. But that shelf was just the beginning. What came after, the joy, the connection, the rediscovery of myself as a woman rather than just a widow. That was the real story. The story of how life can surprise you at any age. How love doesn't follow rules or timelines. How the heart never truly grows old. I survived the lie and I found peace. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. Let's keep these real voices alive. So that's my story, or at least this chapter of it. Who knows what the next year will bring? More challenges certainly, more raised eyebrows probably, but also I hope more joy, more discovery, more moments of connection that make all the difficulties worthwhile. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that life doesn't end at 60 or 70 or even 80. It changes, evolves, presents new challenges and new opportunities. The heart doesn't retire. It doesn't stop seeking connection. Stop feeling joy and pain, stop yearning for meaning and purpose. As long as we're breathing, we have the chance to begin again. To surprise ourselves, to defy expectations, our own as much as others. I never expected to find love again at 65. Never imagined I'd rediscover passion and desire, and that giddy feeling of anticipation that I thought belonged exclusively to the young. But here I am. Living proof that life's greatest adventures don't always happen when we're young and beautiful, according to society's standards. Sometimes they happen precisely when we think all our great adventures are behind us. So if you're reading this and wondering if your time for joy has passed, if your capacity for surprise and delight has withered with age, take it from this old teacher turned unlikely romantic. The heart knows no timeline. Your story isn't over until you say it is. And that, my friends, is perhaps the most valuable lesson I've learned in all my 66 years on this earth. And that's my story. Now, I want to know, where are you listening from? Leave a comment below letting me know what city you're in. Sending my love to all of you.